Strategically, Somalia's coastline is one of the most important in the African continent. The Indian Ocean beats against Mogadishu's harbour walls in the south, whilst further north she has a complete view of the mouth of the Red Sea. It's an importance which wasn't lost on the Russians who, when a military coup brought the present Somali government to power in 1969, stepped in to sew up their first ever defence deal with a black African state. Well, this apparently happy coexistence between Russians and Somalis took a turn for the worst when, last April, after the Ethiopians had kicked out their American backers, the Soviets decided to move in their place. For the Somalis, it was devastating. The Russians were moving in with their oldest enemy. The conflict stems from the shifting lifestyle of many Somalis, something British and Italian boundary makers failed to take account of back in the 1880s. For in setting the boundary between Ethiopia and Somalia, they cut a line through the heart of these nomadic peoples who wander hundreds of miles oblivious of frontiers. The maps left 2 million Somali nomads in the Ogaden region well inside Ethiopia. For 17 years, the West Somali Liberation Front have been fighting to win back the territory and reunite the Somali people. Headquartered in the heart of Somalia's capital, the front's leader, Abdullah Hassan, accepts that they've intensified the war in recent months precisely because the problems posed for the Ethiopians in changing from American to Russian weaponry leave them at their most vulnerable. And by all accounts, heavy losses have been inflicted upon the Ethiopians. The Russians here, far from pleased with developments, transferred several top diplomats with an intimate knowledge of Somalia's military secrets straight across to Ethiopia. It was at this moment, 6 weeks ago, that President Siad Barre, worried that the Russians might suddenly cut off his arms supply, published a shopping list of weapons he needed from the West. The British initially expressed interest, but it soon emerged that the Somali government was anxious to maintain whatever links it could with the Soviets, and since then the British and others have said they won't supply weapons that are likely to fuel the fighting in the Ogaden. Russian ships are still at anchor off Mogadishu, and diplomatic sources say that until very recently, Soviet arms were still coming ashore. But this week, the head of national security here, a keen Moscow man, has been reported as saying those supplies have now stopped. This may in part explain why after dark last Sunday a Soviet plane arrived to ferry the Somali president to Moscow. The Russians are playing for high stakes. They want both nations on Africa's Horn to pursue Soviet-style socialism and fit into their global plan. The Somalis want the war in the Ogaden settled on their terms, with the reunification of the Somali people. If the Russians won't help them do that, then it's anyone's guess what happens next. Jon Snow, News at 10, Mogadishu.